Hey, math kids, it's Mr. McComb. It's Monday. It's time to get into some math stuff. Uh, Thanks again for all you that completed this stuff last week, turning some things and working hard on the dividing decimals. This is our last lesson we're going to cover in dividing decimals, and this is really a great one because it's going to help us really do a good job of putting all together the skills we've been working on and being sort of like have a power within us to solve the tough problems and know how to continue solving these problems. And the title of this lesson is Write Zeros in the Dividend. So the dividend is that number we're starting with and dividing before we get to the quotient. And this is actually a really great lesson. When we get through this one, if you really get it, you can be like, yes, okay, I like this. I can figure out exact answers here. And this is, again, going to give us some skills and connect together some of the things we've been working on. So here has our big idea here, our big connection is when decimals are divided, the dividend may not have enough digits for you to complete the division, meaning like you might have a remainder, but we're not going to have remainders anymore. We're going to know what to do if we kind of run out of room or if we don't have remainders to put, if we don't want to put remainders. It says in these cases, you can write zeros to the right of the last digit, and that way we can keep working through that. So real quick on this, one thing we've worked on this year is point out, especially like when we give final answers, we talked about how if we have an answer, let's say we have an answer that was 2 and 4/10, whatever. Sometimes if we added the decimals up or whatever, we might have got an answer like 2 and 40 hundredths. And what we usually said is what we can do with that is take away that zero and kind of give our answer. It's like a cleaner way to give your answer if you call it 2 and 4/10, but it's the same thing as 2 and 40 hundredths. So what we're going to see now is if we might have an example of, let's say another number, 47, or sorry, how about, 48 and 5/10, we might divide out and not get like an exact answer. We might have a remainder. But what we can actually do is think, okay, if I put a zero onto this, it's still the same amount. It just goes out an extra place value. And I can put a whole bunch of zeros on here if I really need to. And that's going to help me find an answer soon, okay? Notice that this is the same as if I take all those zeros off. So just like I usually would say, let's take those zeros off the end to kind of make it, again, cleaner to look at the end, we can put zeros on that also doesn't change. It's still the same number. But what we will see is that these can be really helpful to us, this idea of putting zeros on the end to help us continue dividing and finding exact answers. Okay, so we're going to look through a couple examples and then we'll get to a couple more that really put these skills together. I'm not really going to mess with reading the introduction, but basically we're going to look at this question here, or this problem of dividing 45 and 8/10 divided by 4. Now, one thing I love that I see here is we're going to have an estimate first. So we're thinking about those compatible numbers skills we had. We're going to keep our divisor the same as 4. And if we find a compatible number, 45 and 8/10 is close to 44 in this case. You could also round it up to 48, but in this case they did 44, which would make that estimated answer 11. So we're going to think our answer is going to be somewhere near 11, somewhere around 11, okay? So we're kind of looking out for that. Again, good to estimate ahead of time. Now let's start working this problem. Now we see here, I like the step one, they say put that decimal right where it goes and make sure you have it right where it needs to be so you can start solve the problem. Put that decimal above, in the quotient above the decimal point in the dividends. We're going to go boom, right there. There it is. So then we can start solving. Again, it's always good just to put that there ahead of time and get going on that, okay? Let's go ahead and start now solving the problem. If we look at this, we're going to think, okay, again, just getting back to our division skills with long division, how many times would 4 go into, let's see, the first one we would look at is 4. I can get a 4 out of that, right? 4 goes into 4, of course, one time. And I can start working through this guy now a little bit, okay? So if 4 goes into 4 once, when I multiply, that would make, of course, 4. And if I subtract out, I get 0. And I'm going to bring down that 5 for my next part, okay? So I'm going to bring down a 5 by doing that. And I'm going to think, okay, now how many times would 4 go into 5? Well, again, that would, of course, be one time, okay, right? So we're going to put a 1 in here again. One time it goes in, which would, of course, once again make 4. And when we subtract that out, this time we get a 1. Okay? Then what we'll do is we'll bring down and have an 8. So we're going to think how many times would 4 go into 18? I'm bringing down my 8. Okay? How many times would 4 go into 18? Again, just think about the division. This is the easy part, right? These are the skills we're using. 4, of course, would go into 18 4 times, right? 4 times would be what we'll put here. And, of course, that would be 16 that we can subtract out now. We'll subtract 16. And then I get down here and I've got 2 left over. Okay, now again, in the past, we might have said, well, I'm just going to put 11 4/10 remainder 2. But now what we're going to learn to do today, and again, this is like the big exciting stuff. I know some of you get excited about math. What we're going to do today is actually be able to add zeros to the dividend to take us over to step 3, and we're going to be able to keep going and find an exact answer. When we tell them a remainder left over, that means it didn't quite divide evenly, but our answer is not exactly the right exact answer. What we can do now is give an answer that has an exact decimal amount, okay? So I'm going to go over to the step 3, and I'm going to put in my 11 4/10 that we've already found. Then what I do, notice here, when we subtract out, we have a 2, and then we can bring down a 0. Notice here they added in a 0. It was 45 8/10, but then we can add a 0 in here to make it 45 80/100. Now again, that doesn't change the amount. It's the same amount. We don't want to change the amount of stuff we have, the dividing we're doing. We're just adding those zeros on the end, and again, it represents the same amount, just goes out an extra place value, and then what that allows us to do is now I can put a 0 here, okay? And now I can keep dividing. So I can think, how many times is 4 going to go into 20 now? Again, I just put that 0 there because I didn't change how much it is. I just put a 0 on the end and then drop it down like a regular long division. And then we can think, okay, how many times does 4 go into 20? And now we can think, all right, well, that's going to, of course, be 5 times that 4 will go into 20. And if I do that, that equals 20. And when I subtract that out, I get 0. So, hey, look at there. There we found an exact answer. We use this idea of if I place a 0 in the dividend and bring it down, I can keep going. If I needed to, I could put another 0 and another one and another one. Now, the examples we'll see won't have too many that will have to do that, but that's the big skill we're working on here, okay? 45 8/10 is the same as 45 80/100, and it'll all divide evenly. We get an answer of 11 45/100 in this case. Now, again, notice we're calculating speed. If you're in my science class, we've been doing some of that. We'll be doing some of that later this week, too. So get into that and look at that. So again, big idea here, we can just continue dividing and by putting zeros into the dividend, and then eventually we can work it out to where we get the exact answer. So again, no more writing remainders. Now we're going to use this idea of put a 0 to help us continue through. Okay, let's go to another example here. Here we see one where we divide 372 by 15. So these are 2 whole numbers. We don't have any decimals here. So what I want you to do is think about if I'm dividing 372, where would that decimal point be? Okay, so think about where would that decimal be? It's not there, but we're going to put it in here. It's going to come in handy at some point, okay? Now, and when they actually go through and divide these, they actually start us off for us. 15 would go into 37 2 times, which would make 30. Subtract, you get 7, 72. When you bring down the 2, 15 would go into 72 4 times, and so we get 60. If we subtract out now, we would get 12. Just a little bit. We get 12 when we subtract. And then notice that here they've added the 0, okay? Here they added the 0 to the end. Notice there's a decimal point now. And we're going to add a 0. We're going to think how many times would 15 go into 120. Now, you might have to think through if you get an example like this, how many times would it be? What we're actually going to say here, let me go ahead and put my decimal in so we can see a little clearly. 24, and now we're going to go there. So now we put a decimal here. We got to put one there because we're decimal point and then the zeros to add on. Now, how many times would 15 go into 120? That's actually going to be 8 times. Now, again, you might have to check off to the side and guess and check and see. But we can get to 8 there, which would equal exactly 120. Which will subtract out and leave us with 0. Okay, so then we have 0 left over. Now, again, normally in the past, we might have said our answer was 372 remainder 12. But now what we're going to do is say, okay, I don't need to just say remainder whatever. I can put a decimal point and then place a 0 here and then bring it down and continue out until it works out evenly for me. So in the end, we find, hey, look at how it's like I said, it's like we've got a superpower now. What wasn't there before, now we can do and find these exact answers, 24 and 8/10 for our answer here. Okay, so there's another good example. Again, if we don't see a decimal point, it's a whole number. Just think that decimal is after the ones place. And then when you add those zeros in, make sure you put in that decimal. Okay. Now, this last example I like a lot. These last examples are kind of putting all the skills together. So here we see 1 in 23 hundredths divided by 0 in 6 hundredths. Keep in mind there, the first thing we need to do is make sure we're dividing by a whole number. So we want our divisor to be a whole number. Again, we're using that skill of I can move my decimals by multiplying by powers of 10, or again, we're just using those mental math skills we have by moving decimal places. 2 decimals to make this 6 hundredths a 6 whole number, or whole ones, 6. And then I need to do the same thing for my divisor, or sorry, my dividend, to make it work out evenly for us. Okay, again, that's a skill from last week, and now we're going to apply it here. Then when we do that, we find, okay, this is the same as 123 divided by 6. And when we work it out, we get to here. We work it out. They do it for us. 6 goes into 12 twice, so subtract 12. And we have 0. Then we bring down a 3. 6 goes into 3 0 times, so we can bring it, add a 0. Then we place it here. And we need to think, okay, we have a 0 we're going to put in here. So that means we're going to actually put in a 0 here to think, okay, how many times will 6 go into 30? So again, notice here, we put a decimal point here, and then the 0. So you got to put that decimal point if it's not there, because if we add a 0 onto here, it'd be like 1,230. We don't want that. We want it to stay 123, so that decimal allows us to do it. And then we can bring down that 0 and think, okay, how many times, actually, I guess it's all the way down here. How many times would 6 go into 30? And hey, that's a fact we know, right? 6 will go into 30 5 times, which would make exactly 30. And then it works out nicely for us. Okay, so again, big idea here is we're adding our zeros into the dividend and then continuing our division process by using that 0 to continue working through until we get a number we want or that works for us. Okay. The last example here, I'm going to let you guys work that out, but just keep that in mind. Here they start us off. We find that 10 divided by 8/10 when we move our decimal places is the same as 100 divided by 8. And notice here again, I'm just going to set you up with it so you make sure you do it. We're going to put a decimal here and here. I'm telling you, you're going to need to at least put a 0 here as well to start working that one out. Okay, so I'm going to leave you guys to work on that one. And then what you got the rest of the day is page 331, just numbers 1 through 8. So my next video for tomorrow, I'll go over a couple of those problems to practice this. But again, keep in mind what you got to do. Keep adding zeros on until you get it out to work out with 0 left over, so there's no remainders. Now we're not going to have to deal with remainders again, and that's, again, the big skill, putting it all together, okay? Again, hope this was helpful. I'll talk to you guys tomorrow, see some more math going on as we continue through. Make sure you work up to number 8 on page 331, and I'll see you guys soon. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.